They told me I should live less comfortably. But the truth is simpler. They just wanted to live more comfortably at my expense. And the night they uninvited me from my own son's dinner, I finally understood that comfort wasn't the problem. Respect was. I was standing in front of Daniel's house in the soft evening light, smoothing the sleeves of my cardigan like a nervous girl. Not a 72-year-old woman who'd spent a lifetime keeping things together. He'd asked me to come at 7 sharp for a small family dinner. His words, not mine. I'd even baked the lemon loaf he liked as a child, the only recipe he ever asked me to keep safe. But the moment I stepped onto the porch, the door opened just a crack. Rachel's face appeared first. Her smile was thin, polite, the way a receptionist greets someone to whom she has nothing to offer. "Oh, Martha," she said, "I think Daniel forgot to tell you. Tonight's not ideal." Before I could answer, Daniel pushed forward. My son. Taller than me, broader, wearing that new watch I had paid for. Though he'd long stopped remembering things like that. "Mom," he started, voice low. "We're keeping tonight small. Just a few colleagues and friends. It might be uncomfortable for you." There was a strange pause then, as if even he heard what he'd just said. Uncomfortable for me? In my son's home. The home I'd funded the down payment for. The home they regularly reminded me I should be grateful to visit. I held the loaf closer to my chest, the warm smell of lemon and sugar rising between us. "I thought you invited me," I said quietly. "I know," he replied, eyes darting anywhere but at mine. "But Rachel feels, well, the group tonight is a bit elevated. Elevated. As if I were dirt under their polished shoes." Rachel folded her arms, tilting her chin in that practiced way of hers. The one that said she believed she'd risen above her own beginnings long before they ever bought this house. "It's just better if you skip this one," she said. "You know how image works." I felt something in my chest, not breaking, not yet, but shifting. A quiet cracking, like an old board under too much weight. They didn't want me inside. Me, who had covered their emergencies, their children's tuition, their late mortgage fees, their vacations, their little, unexpected expenses. Me, who still paid half of what they called their necessary lifestyle adjustments. I took one slow breath, steady as I could. I see. The loaf felt heavy in my hands, suddenly foolish. I didn't offer it. I didn't hand it over to be forgotten in some corner of their immaculate kitchen. I simply stepped back. Daniel exhaled like I'd solved a problem for him. "We'll do another dinner soon, something simpler." Simpler, meaning me. Rachel added, "Yes, something more appropriate." There it was, the word, appropriate. As if I were an outdated piece of furniture they didn't know what to do with. "Well," I said finally, "you two enjoy your evening." I turned before they could answer. Walked back down the path, slowly, the way old bones insist on moving. The porch light clicked off behind me before I reached the driveway. Not even a shadow left for me to follow home. In my car, I sat for a long moment with the lemon loaf on my lap. Cars passed. Porch lights came on in other houses. Somewhere far away, someone laughed. But not here. Not for me. I started the engine. My hands trembled only once. When I realized the truth I had refused to name for years. They didn't just uninvite me from a dinner. They uninvited me from my own place in their lives. "Live less comfortably," Rachel once told me, with that same thin smile, as if I owed her something, as if my comfort had ever been the problem. Driving home through the fading evening light, I felt a quiet, unfamiliar certainty settle into me like a stone at the bottom of a lake. If they wanted me out of their comfort, fine, but they had no idea how much of that comfort came from me, and how easily it could disappear. When I came home that night, I didn't turn on the lights. I walked through the familiar rooms by memory, the narrow hallway, the little kitchen with its humming refrigerator, the armchair by the window where I'd spent so many evenings stitching small tears in other people's clothes and ignoring the larger tears in my own life. The lemon loaf was still in my bag. I set it on the counter, untouched, the way Daniel had left me untouched on his doorstep. The quiet inside my house felt different tonight. Not peaceful, not lonely, something sharper. Something that made me pull open the drawer where I kept every important paper of the last 15 years. The drawer stuck. It always did. Groaning like an old woman asked to bend too far. I tugged harder until it gave way and revealed what I already knew was there. The thick folder marked family expenses. A foolish label, really, because the expenses belonged to only one member of this family. Me. I lifted the folder out carefully. My hands don't work as smoothly as they once did, but I've always kept myself precise, organized. Even grief, over the years, I stacked into neat little piles. The first page was an old check copy, $10,000 for Daniel's temporary career transition. I remembered that year. He'd said he needed space, time, air to build something meaningful. I'd given him that money with the belief that he was building a future. I just didn't realize it wouldn't include me. Next page. $600 for Rachel's professional wardrobe. I could still hear her voice. It's important for my credibility, Martha. Clients judge appearances. Perhaps she was right. She had judged mine often enough. Then came the health insurance payments, the school fees, the car repairs, the months when an unexpected bill had arrived. Always unexpected, always urgent, always requiring me to step in quietly, without complaint. I flipped through page after page, a slow parade of numbers marching past my eyes. 118 active payments. I had counted them once out of curiosity, then begun to avoid counting again because the truth had felt too heavy. Mortgage, utilities, insurance, tutoring, subscriptions, gym memberships, even the landscaping service that trimmed their hedges every other week. I paid for that too. Apparently, even their bushes lived more comfortably than I did. I sat down at the kitchen table, the folder spread open like a confession. And for the first time in years, I asked myself a question I had never dared to ask. When had my support stopped being love and become expectation? Perhaps the shift had been gradual, a soft slope rather than a cliff, easy to slide down without noticing. After George died, I tried so hard to keep everyone together, to be useful, needed, necessary. I thought that being generous was the same as being appreciated. But the truth lay here in front of me, ink on paper. They didn't see my giving as love. They saw it as duty. Maybe that's why Rachel talked about my comfort with such casual cruelty. In her mind, my money was simply a river that flowed through her home. And my comfort, my privacy, my dignity were stones along the bank she didn't mind stepping on. I closed the folder gently, as if it were something fragile. It wasn't. I was. I stood and walked to the back hallway closet, the one where I kept old coats and memories no one else wanted. On the top shelf, in a faded shoebox, I found the letters Daniel had sent me years ago. Before Rachel. Before the distance. Before entitlement grew like a vine between us. They were warm letters then. Grateful. Curious. Full of promises. Promises he had long forgotten. I sat on the edge of the bed holding the box, letting my fingers rest on the cardboard. I didn't cry. At my age, tears don't come easily anymore. Or maybe it's that I've learned to keep them where no one can take advantage of them. Instead, I whispered the truth into the quiet room, just to hear it spoken aloud. They don't love me. They love what I provide. The words didn't shatter me the way they once would have. They settled inside me like settling dust. Quiet. Final. A small click sounded from the kitchen. The refrigerator turning on. The only thing in this house that depended on me and gave something back. I rose slowly and put the folder on the table. I wasn't ready for decisions yet. Not fully. But for the first time, the thought crossed my mind without fear. What if I stopped paying? What if their comfort ended before mine ever did? I turned off the kitchen light, leaving the folder open like a doorway to something new. Tomorrow, I thought. Tomorrow, I would count every payment and decide who truly deserved anything from me at all. The next morning, I woke before sunrise, the way older bones often do, not suddenly, but with a slow awareness, like the body is remembering something the mind hasn't caught up to yet. I lay there for a while, staring at the soft outline of the ceiling, listening to the house breathe. It's an old house like me with its creaks and sighs, but it has never once betrayed me. By the time I reached the kitchen, the sky outside had turned from charcoal to ash. The folder still lay open on the table, as if waiting for me. I almost closed it out of habit, but something in me resisted the old rhythm. The one where I cleaned the mess first and questioned the pain last. Instead, I sat down and pulled the folder closer. I began counting. Slowly, carefully, line by line, like I used to reconcile ledgers in my bookkeeping days. Mortgage, insurance, gas, electricity, student loans, car payments, streaming services, a monthly delivery of vitamins for Rachel, a grooming membership for their dog. A dog I had never once been allowed to pet indoors. Every few minutes I stopped, rubbed my thumb along the edge of the paper, and whispered the number under my breath. 27? 54. 91. 118. 118 channels through which my life flowed into theirs. At 72, people assume you don't understand numbers, but I always did. And these numbers told a story far more honest than anything my son or daughter-in-law had said to me in years. When I finished, I kept my hand on the stack, grounding myself, the way you hold the arm of a chair before standing. I didn't need to recount. The total was not a mistake. For a moment, I heard Rachel's voice in my mind, so clearly it felt like she was sitting across from me. You live more comfortably than you should at your age. I felt my jaw tighten, a rare thing for me. My face is usually soft, tired, patient. But that morning, something inside me shifted, like a door unlocking after years of rust. Comfortably. Her word, not mine. I live in an old house with mismatched dishes and a car that rattles in cold weather. My furniture is older than Daniel's marriage. My clothes last me decades because I mend them myself when the seams give in. And my only indulgence is a better brand of tea I buy when it's on sale. If this is comfort, then what was their life? Their vacations? Their renovations? Their luxuries disguised as necessities? I stood up to heat some water for tea, but my hand strayed toward the window. Across the quiet street, The neighbor's house glowed with warm yellow light. A young couple lived there now. They waved at me sometimes. They seemed kind. But even kindness is something I've learned to be careful with. You can't spend it, and you can't eat it. And you certainly can't count on it when you need someone to hold your hand in the hospital. The kettle clicked. I poured hot water into my mug, the steam drifting upward like a sigh. When I sat down again, my back cracked softly. The body's reminder that time moves whether or not we're ready for it. That was when my phone buzzed. A message from Rachel. Daniel and I talked last night. We think it's best if you don't drop by unannounced anymore. Unannounced. I had been invited, and then dismissed. Now I was being rebranded as an intruder. Another message followed immediately, as if she were delivering a blow, and then the explanation. We're under a lot of stress. Please stop making things uncomfortable. Uncomfortable. That word again. As if my simply existing caused tension in the beams of their perfect little house. I didn't answer. Not because I didn't have words. I had plenty. But because they wouldn't have changed anything. They never did. Instead, I turned the folder toward me again. And this time, I didn't just see transactions. I saw something else. Something I hadn't allowed myself to recognize. Evidence. Proof of a pattern. A record of a one-way love. There is a moment in every woman's life when silence feels heavier than truth. Mine arrived with the morning sun. I pushed the folder aside and reached for a notebook I hadn't used in years. The cover was worn, the pages slightly yellow, but it still opened easily, unlike so many conversations in my family. At the top of the first clean page, with a hand steadier than I expected, I wrote, "What I give, what I lose, what I keep." Below it, I listed 3 columns. The first filled quickly: money, time, presence, forgiveness. The second 2, dignity, rest, my own comfort, my peace. The third stayed nearly empty. That emptiness was the first honest moment I'd had with myself in a very long time. I closed the notebook softly. The kitchen felt colder suddenly, or maybe I was just noticing the chill that had been there all along. I didn't know yet what I would do. Not fully. Not out loud. But I felt something take root inside me. Small, steady, unmistakable. A beginning. And beginnings, at my age, are not to be wasted. Emily showed up that afternoon without warning, though with her, the word never carried the sting it did when Rachel used it. With Emily, unannounced meant the opposite of intrusion. It meant someone still remembered I existed without needing something from me. I heard her footsteps on the porch before I saw her. Lighter than Daniel's, quicker than Rachel's, always a little rushed, as though life urged her forward faster than her thoughts could catch up. When I opened the door, she stood there clutching a stack of textbooks against her chest, cheeks flushed from the cold. "Grandma," she said, and her face softened in relief. "Thank God you're home." "As if I run marathons in my spare time," I answered with a smile, stepping aside to let her in. She laughed, a real warm laugh, the kind that fills a room without asking permission. I had forgotten how good laughter sounds when it isn't polished for an audience. Emily toed off her shoes, the same way she'd done since she was 12, when she decided grown-up courtesy was too stiff and my house didn't deserve any performance. She always said my house felt like a refuge. A place where no one judged her messy ponytail or her chipped nail polish. She followed me into the kitchen and sat at the table, dropping her books with a soft thud. "I brought you banana muffins," she said, lifting a small paper bag. I baked them at midnight. Don't judge the shape. The flavor is negotiable. I poured tea for both of us, and the warmth of her presence settled into the room like sunlight on cold wood. For a moment, I simply watched her hair tied in a loose knot, a pencil stuck behind her ear, a smudge of ink on her thumb. 19 years old, but already wiser than her parents in all the places that mattered. She took a sip of tea and set the cup down with deliberate care before speaking. I saw the messages, she said gently. Mom left her phone on the counter. I shouldn't have looked, I know. You're not responsible for their words, I said. Emily exhaled, her shoulders softening the way they always did when she felt safe enough to be honest. They were talking about you, she continued, saying you take things personally, that you make everything complicated. And Mom said, she hesitated, then met my eyes. She said you should learn to live with less, because people your age don't need comfort. There it was, the sentence that had lodged itself inside me like a splinter long before Emily repeated it. Hearing it from her, gently, hesitantly, somehow made it cut deeper. I sat down across from her. I know, I said quietly. I've heard it before. Emily shook her head, eyes glistening with a hurt that wasn't even hers. It's cruel, and it isn't true. You know that, right? I didn't answer immediately. At my age, truth takes a moment to settle. Finally, I said, comfort is not something we earn by being young. It's something we deserve by being human. She reached across the table and took my hand. Her fingers were warm, steady. She squeezed gently, the way her grandfather used to squeeze mine when he wanted me to feel his conviction rather than hear it. They don't see what you do, Emily said. Everything you've paid for, everything you've held together. A bitter little smile lifted the corner of my mouth. They see it. They just don't want to acknowledge it. Acknowledging things makes people feel indebted. Emily frowned, shaking her head. That's wrong. It may be wrong, I replied, but it's how they've chosen to live, and I've allowed it. The words felt like pulling a splinter out of skin, painful, but relieving once freed. Emily let out a shuddered breath. Dad says he's under pressure, that they have responsibilities, but I don't understand why the weight always falls on you. Because I've made it easy for them, I said. Too easy. She looked down at her hands, twisting a ring around her finger. I hate that they treat you this way. I brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. Don't carry my burdens on your shoulders, sweetheart. That's how women in our family break themselves, trying to hold pain that isn't theirs. She nodded, but her eyes told me she still felt it deeply. We sat in silence for a while, not the heavy kind that suffocates, but the gentle kind that holds two people together without needing words. Finally, Emily spoke softly. Grandma, what are you going to do? I looked at her, really looked, at the only person in that family who visited because she wanted to, not because she needed something. At the girl who came for my stories, not my savings. At the one heart still uncorrupted by convenience. And a quiet determination settled into my chest, firm as a hand pressing against my back. I don't know everything yet, I said, but I know what I can't keep doing. Emily waited, breath held. I can't keep paying for a life that leaves no space for me in it. Her eyes softened. Good. Good. A simple word. But from her, it felt like permission. Permission to claim the years I still had left. We finished our tea. When she stood to leave, she hugged me tighter than usual. Her hair smelled faintly of peppermint shampoo. For a moment, I let myself linger in that embrace. The warmth, the sincerity, the rare and precious feeling of being wanted. "Whatever you decide," Emily whispered. "I'm with you." I watched her walk down the path, her shoulders straight, her steps sure. And when the door closed behind her, the house didn't feel empty. It felt ready. I barely slept that night. Not from anger. That burns hot and quick, and I am too old for fires that leave only ashes. No, what kept me awake was clarity. A quiet, steady kind of clarity, like the moment fog lifts and you finally see the road you've been walking on for years. By morning, I had made my decision. The bank opened at 9. I arrived at 8:30. The autumn air was sharp, carrying the smell of wet leaves and something cold underneath. I stood outside the glass doors of Fairhill Community Bank, my breath fogging faintly in the light. I wasn't nervous. Not exactly. But there's a particular tremor that comes when a woman stops being obedient. Even at 72, the body remembers what it means to shift from endurance to action. At 9 o'clock sharp, the doors unlocked, and a young teller greeted me with a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. I didn't need his eagerness. I needed someone who knew history. Mine. "Is Linda Shelton in?" I asked. His eyebrows rose. "Of course. She's in her office. I'll let her know you're here." Linda had handled my account since George died. She had been there when I buried him, when I sold the house we couldn't manage anymore, when I opened the savings account Daniel now treated like an extension of his wallet. She knew me. More importantly, she remembered when people still respected age instead of exploiting it. Her door opened, and she appeared with that warm, steady expression she always wore. "Martha," she said, "what a nice surprise." "Not a nice one," I answered, "but necessary." She didn't ask questions right there in the hallway. She simply stepped aside, letting me into her office. The door clicked shut with a softness that felt like permission. I sat. She sat, and the silence between us settled like an old friend. "What do you need from me?" she asked calmly. "I need to cancel every automatic payment tied to my account," I said. "Every one of them?" Linda blinked, not in judgment, but in careful understanding. "That's a big change. You have quite a few recurring charges." 118, I said. "I counted yesterday." She nodded slowly. "All right. We can suspend them immediately. Full cancellation will require signatures." "That's fine." She turned to her computer. The tapping of keys filled the room. I watched her work, methodical, precise, not once questioning me in the way my family always did. After a few minutes, she glanced at me. "Some of these payments are very substantial, Martha. May I ask, is everything all right at home?" Home. The word tightened something in my chest. "Everything is exactly as it's been for years," I said. "And that's the problem." Linda's eyes softened. "Understood." I felt myself exhale. Not relief, not sadness. Something steadier. When she finished, she printed a stack of documents and placed them in front of me. The signatures felt almost ceremonial. Each one a quiet reclaiming of my own life. With every stroke of the pen, something loosened in my shoulders. Something that had been knotted for far too long. When the last page was done, I closed the folder gently. "There's one more thing," I said. Linda waited. "I need to revoke the financial power of attorney I gave to my son." For the first time, a flicker of surprise crossed her face. "Of course. We can process that today as well." Her professionalism didn't falter, but her voice held a depth I hadn't heard in years, a kind of respect, maybe even admiration, though neither of us would say it out loud. As she prepared the documents, I let my gaze drift to the window behind her desk. Outside, the street was busy with people living their lives, rushing, checking their phones, chasing things they believed mattered. And here I was, at 72, quietly unspooling the web I had tied myself into. When everything was done, Linda closed the folder and gave me a look I felt deep in my bones. "You've made brave decisions today," she said softly. I smiled, a small, tired smile, but real. "No, I've made overdue ones." She walked me to the door. As I stepped out into the crisp morning air, the weight that had lived on my shoulders for years seemed to lift, not all at once, but in slow, certain degrees. For the first time in a long while, I felt like my life belonged to me again. The walk from the bank to my car felt different than it ever had before. Not freer, not yet, but steadier, as if each step belonged to me in a way it hadn't in years. My hands were still trembling slightly, the way they do after a difficult conversation, but inside, I felt something almost unfamiliar. Resolve. I sat behind the wheel for a moment, letting the quiet settle around me. The world outside went on. Cars passing, leaves scratching across the pavement, a dog barking somewhere far off. All of it moving, living, unaware that a 72-year-old woman had just pulled a single thread that would unravel the entire tapestry of her family's comfort. There was still one more errand to run. I drove downtown, past the bakery George used to love, the library where Emily still studied in the quiet corner by the window, and the hardware store Daniel promised, 10 years ago now, to take over someday. He never did. Ambition rarely survives hard work. I parked in front of the brick building where my lawyer's office sat on the second floor. Old elevator, older carpet, the air smelling faintly of dust and coffee. Familiar in its own way. Trusted. "Good morning, Mrs. Ellington," the receptionist said gently as I entered. "Is Mr. Collins available?" I asked. She nodded and led me to his office. When Harold Collins looked up from his paperwork, his eyes warmed in that steady, respectful way he had. He'd known George. He'd written our first will. He was one of the few people in this town who didn't treat me like a fragile vase or an expired coupon. "Martha," he said, rising to shake my hand. "It's been a while. Come in." I sat down slowly, adjusting my cardigan the way old women do when bracing for something significant. "What can I help you with today?" His voice was calm, ready, patient. "I need to change my will," I answered, "and revise the trust I planned years ago. And I'd like to set up a new one." He leaned back with a soft sigh, not of resistance, but of understanding. "All right. Tell me what's happened." I looked at my hands for a moment. They're older now, mapped with lines that didn't exist when George held them. But they're still capable. Still mine. "My son," I said, choosing each word with care, "believes my money is his security blanket, and I've spent too many years letting that be true." He nodded slowly. "You want to protect your assets from being misused." "I want to protect myself," I corrected gently. "And I want Emily, the only one who treats me like a person, not a resource, to inherit what I've spent a lifetime building." Harold folded his hands, his expression softening. "Then we'll create a living trust in Emily's name. Something safe, something he can't touch, and we'll update the will accordingly." He didn't ask why Daniel no longer deserved what he once would have inherited. He didn't ask what Rachel had said to me. He didn't ask how many payments I'd canceled this morning or how many years of quiet humiliation I'd swallowed. He didn't need to. Instead, he walked me through the options. Irrevocable trusts, beneficiary updates, asset protections, contingency clauses. It was strange how empowering it felt to hear words that once terrified me. Legal language used to remind me of loss. Now it sounded like structure, boundaries, a future that belonged to me. As we worked through the paperwork, Harold paused once, looking at me over the rim of his glasses. "You're not acting out of anger, are you, Martha? Decisions like these, they should come from clarity." I met his gaze, steady and sure. "This isn't vengeance," I said. "It's correction." He smiled, a slow, approving smile. "Then you're doing exactly the right thing." We spent nearly an hour signing forms, confirming details, setting wheels in motion that couldn't easily be undone. When the final paper was placed in front of me, I hesitated, not from doubt, but from the weight of what it meant. The pen felt cool between my fingers. One signature. One line. 40 years of sacrifice shifting back into my hands. I wrote my name. When I was finished, Harold gathered the documents with the care of someone who understood the gravity of each page. "You've made strong decisions today," he said quietly. "Not strong," I replied. "Necessary." He walked me to the door, and as I stepped back into the hallway, something inside me settled. Something quiet, firm, long overdue. By the time I reached the parking lot, the sky had brightened. The air felt lighter than it had in days. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of what would happen when Daniel and Rachel realized what I'd done. I was only afraid of one thing: why it took me so long to start choosing myself. The house felt unusually still when I returned that afternoon, as if it were holding its breath along with me. I set my purse on the hall table and stood there for a moment, listening to the quiet. Not the frightened quiet of uncertainty, but the steady quiet of a woman who has finally stopped apologizing for her own existence. I made tea, the familiar ritual grounding me. The kettle hissed, the steam curled upward. The faint scent of Earl Grey filled the air. But even these comforts felt different now, like I was tasting my own life for the first time without someone else's worries dissolving into the cup. My phone vibrated on the counter. Then again. Then again. A string of notifications lit up the screen like a storm front rolling in. Daniel, 3 missed calls. Rachel, 5 messages. Daniel, voicemail. Rachel, voicemail. Family group chat, 12 unread. I didn't check a single one. I put the phone face down and carried my tea into the living room. I sank into the armchair by the window, the one place in this house that had held me through grief, through change, through every quiet betrayal. The late afternoon sun slanted across the floorboards, dust drifting in the light like tiny, aimless worlds. Everything seemed calm, almost serene. Inside, something else stirred. Not anger, not sorrow. Something more solid. Silence. Chosen silence. My whole life, I've been trained to respond immediately, to soothe, to fix, to make things easier for others. Even as a child, my mother used to say, "Martha is such a good girl. She never causes trouble." And for 72 years, I kept living up to that sentence, never causing trouble, never raising my voice, never wanting too much. I tucked my feet beneath me, feeling the warmth spread through my tired legs. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked, a car door slammed. Life went on, unaware that a woman inside this small house had just, quietly, deliberately, redrawn the entire map of her future. The phone buzzed again. I ignored it. Instead, I opened the notebook I'd begun the day before. The page where I had listed 3 columns stared back at me. What I give, what I lose, what I keep. The first 2 were full, the last one still nearly empty. But today, I added something. In slow, steady handwriting, I wrote, my peace, my time, my choices. Then I closed the notebook gently, as if sealing a promise. Another vibration from the kitchen. Daniel again, most likely. Desperate or angry or both. I imagined him pacing his immaculate kitchen, the same one I helped fund, wondering why the mortgage hadn't gone through, why the utilities suddenly bounced back, why the credit cards were declining. I pictured Rachel scrolling through her phone, her face twisted in irritation, trying to understand why the automated payments for her vitamins, her salon appointments, her subscription boxes all failed at once. A younger version of me would have felt guilt, a knot of worry, the urge to smooth things over. But today, nothing. Only the soft awareness that the world was finally shifting into the shape it should have been all along. I wasn't punishing them. I was simply removing myself from a role I never should have taken on, the invisible backbone of their comfort. My phone vibrated again, longer this time. A call, then another. Then the familiar sound of a voicemail being recorded. I lifted the cup to my lips and drank slowly, the warmth spreading through me like a reminder of who I used to be before other people's needs consumed every inch of me. I looked out the window, watching a few yellow leaves flutter to the ground, delicate and final. The truth was quiet, but it settled deep. They would panic. They would blame me. They would demand explanations. But explanations weren't owed. For once in my life, I wasn't required to pick up the pieces of someone else's neglect. For once, I didn't have to rescue anyone. Silence was its own answer. And as the hours passed, the weight that had lived between my ribs for years began to lighten. So subtly at first that I almost didn't notice. But by the time the sun dipped low over the street, the feeling had grown full and steady. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't waiting. I wasn't theirs anymore. Not in the way they'd grown accustomed to. The phone buzzed one more time, a final, insistent tremor. I let it ring. I had nothing left to give them that wouldn't cost me myself. The first real sign of collapse came early the next morning, sharp as a dropped plate on a quiet floor. I had barely finished buttering my toast when the phone lit up with a message from Daniel. Not words, just a single screenshot. A red notification from his bank app. Payment declined. Mortgage overdue. A second screenshot followed immediately. Electricity bill. Payment failed. Then the message. Mom, what's going on? Did something happen with your account? Call me back immediately. Immediately. That word again, the old command wrapped in the disguise of concern. I took a slow sip of my tea. The house was still, peaceful. My life hadn't fallen apart. My lights were on. My bills were paid. Everything about my day was steady, except for the vibration of Daniel's panic bleeding through the screen. I didn't answer. A minute later, another message from Rachel appeared. The utilities are bouncing. The mortgage is bouncing. This is serious, Martha. We need you to check your bank right now. Need you. As if I were a malfunctioning appliance they expected me to fix. I set the phone down and stepped outside to water the small patch of garden George used to tend. The air was crisp, the soil dark and cool. The marigolds had begun to wilt a little, but they still held their color. stubborn things, refusing to fade simply because the season demanded it. Behind me, through the screen door, the phone buzzed again and again. A frenzy now. The rhythm of people accustomed to stability suddenly forced to stand on ground they never realized wasn't theirs. For years I had kept that ground solid beneath them. Now they felt it shifting. I finished watering the flowers before going back inside. The phone showed 5 missed calls, 4 voicemails, and a string of messages. This isn't funny. We have obligations, Martha. Are you okay? Why aren't you answering? Call me now. And from Rachel, sharper than the rest. If the mortgage falls through, it affects all of us. All of us. How easily she grouped me with them when it served her. I sat at the kitchen table and opened my notebook again. The page from yesterday stared back at me. My peace, my time, my choices. I touched the edge of the paper, a grounding gesture, before closing the notebook. The phone rang again, vibrating across the table, its sound echoing off the quiet walls. I let it ring. I had known this moment would come, but I didn't think it would arrive so quickly or with such intensity. 15 minutes later, another message arrived, this time from an unknown number. Mrs. Ellington, this is Thomas from Ridgewood Insurance Agency. I'm calling about an overdue payment on Daniel and Rachel's homeowner's policy. Our records show the automatic transfer from your account failed, so even the insurance company was beginning to notice. I sat back in my chair and inhaled deeply, the smell of fresh tea filling my lungs. I had braced myself for guilt, that familiar tug, that old instinct to fix, to soften, to protect. But guilt didn't come, only a steady understanding. They were finally feeling the weight of living the life I had funded for them, a life they had mistaken for their own achievement. The phone buzzed again, a long, urgent buzz. Another voicemail. I didn't listen to it. Instead, I reached for the radio and turned on soft classical music, letting the rooms fill with gentle strings instead of frantic demands. Around noon, the house phone began ringing. The number no one ever called unless things were serious. I didn't move toward it. It stopped after 7 rings, then silence. For a while, I simply sat in the armchair, hands wrapped around a warm mug, watching sunlight crawl across the rug. The quiet of my home soothed something deep inside me, something long ignored. This is what my life could have been, I thought. Steady, simple, mine. Another message from Daniel appeared. Mom, the bank says the credit line is closed. Closed. What did you do? We have payments scheduled. We have responsibilities. You should have told us. I read the words slowly, letting each one settle. You should have told us. As if my choices required their permission. As if my account, my money, my life belonged to them. For years I had been their safety net. Not out of obligation, but out of love. A love they had long taken for granted. The silence in the house grew fuller, almost warm. Then Rachel's message arrived. The sharpest yet. This isn't how families treat each other. I let out a breath that might have been a laugh. If only she understood the irony. My phone buzzed one last time before the afternoon settled in. A short message from Emily. Grandma, whatever's happening, I'm here. Don't let them scare you. Call me when you're ready. Only her words softened me. I held the phone for a moment, thumb resting on her message, the only one that didn't demand, accuse, or command. Then I set it down gently. Daniel and Rachel's comfort was beginning to collapse. The first cracks spreading through a life they had assumed was unshakable. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the years of silence and obedience, I felt something rise like a quiet, steady tide. Not triumph, not bitterness, just relief. Daniel showed up at my door just after 6 in the evening, long before I expected him to. I heard the car first, the crunch of gravel under tires, louder than usual, hurried, impatient. Then footsteps across the porch, each one heavy with the rhythm of a man who'd spent the whole day unraveling. I didn't move right away. I finished rinsing my teacup, dried it carefully, placed it upside down on the rack. Only then did I open the door. Daniel stood there, shoulders tense, face flushed with a mixture of anger and something that looked suspiciously like fear. His tie was crooked. His hair, usually neat, had been combed through with his fingers too many times. The perfect image of a man whose world had finally stopped cooperating. "Mom," he said, pushing past me before I could invite him in. "We need to talk." He said it like a command, as if the urgency of his crisis obligated me to respond. I closed the door behind him with quiet patience. "All right," I said. "Talk." He paced once across the living room, then turned to me sharply. "The mortgage didn't go through. The utilities bounced. The insurance is overdue. And the bank says the credit line we've used for years is closed." His voice rose. "Closed, Mom. What's happening?" I folded my hands in front of me, feeling the calm settle into my bones like warm sand. "I closed it." He stared at me, blinking as though the words were in another language. "You... what?" "I closed it," I repeated. There was a moment, a brief, flickering moment where Daniel looked less like a grown man and more like the frightened boy he used to be. But it was gone in a heartbeat, replaced by indignation. "You can't just do that," he snapped. "I already did." He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair again. "Are you..." His voice lowered. "Are you confused? Is someone advising you? Because this doesn't make sense, Mom. These payments have been in place for years." "Exactly," I said softly. "Years." He froze. The room held still around us. I walked to the armchair and sat down, not out of frailty, but out of choice. "Sit, Daniel." He didn't. He stood there like a man caught between outrage and something he didn't want to name. "Mom, we depend on those payments. We have children, a home." "Responsibilities. Responsibilities you should have been managing yourselves," I replied. "Not outsourcing to me." His face shifted, anger mixing with disbelief. "We're family. Families support each other." I tilted my head. "Do they?" He swallowed. "Of course they do." "And when have you supported me?" He opened his mouth, then shut it again. He tried to look offended, but it didn't land. "I've always," he began. "No," I said, gently but firmly. "You haven't. You visit when you need something. You call when there's a bill. You show up when there's a crisis. But you've never asked how I'm doing. Not truly." I held his gaze. "You treat my help as a given, not a gift." His jaw clenched. "This isn't fair." "Nor was telling me not to come to dinner," I said, "or allowing your wife to tell me I should live less comfortably, or expecting a 72-year-old woman to carry the weight of your lifestyle." He winced, just barely, enough that I knew the words hit the exact place they needed to. "That's not what we meant," he muttered. "But it's what you said," I replied. Silence stretched between us, not peaceful, not comfortable. A silence full of things he'd never noticed and I'd never voiced. Finally, Daniel spoke, his voice softer, but not gentler. You blindsided us. You should have warned me. Warned, as if I were a storm he needed to prepare for. I don't owe you warnings, I said, or explanations, or access to my accounts. His posture stiffened. We can't survive without that help, he said quietly. Yes, I answered. You can. No, Mom, he insisted, panic rising again. You don't understand. We're stretched thin. The kids, the house, my work. Then you'll adjust, I said. Just like I adjusted when I lost your father, when I worked 2 jobs to keep you clothed, when I paid every emergency bill you and Rachel created. His voice shook with anger. This is cruel. No, I said, rising slowly from the chair. Cruel is using your mother's bank account while telling her she embarrasses you. Cruel is letting me stand on your doorstep like I'm someone beneath your guests. Cruel is believing my comfort is optional while yours is essential. He flinched. The truth often hurts more than accusation. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, with a voice that tried for calm and mist, he asked, Is this permanent? Yes. He inhaled sharply, as if the finality cut him. I stepped closer, not threatening, simply present. Daniel, I said quietly, I am not doing this to punish you. I'm doing it because I finally understand that continuing this way would destroy whatever relationship we still have. His shoulders sagged. The fight drained out of him, leaving only exhaustion. I don't know what to do, he whispered. That, I said gently, is the first honest thing you've said to me in years. He didn't respond. He just turned toward the door slowly, as if each step were heavier than the last. At the threshold, he paused. Mom, he murmured, not looking at me. Please, think about this. I have, I said. He nodded once, a small, defeated motion, and left. I closed the door behind him softly. No triumph rose in me, no bitterness, only the quiet truth. I had done what he never expected. I had removed myself from their comfort, and it was time for them to learn how to stand without me. Rachel arrived the next afternoon, not with the panic Daniel carried, but with something far sharper: resolve. The kind of resolve people mistake for strength, when really it's just entitlement wearing a straighter spine. I saw her through the window before she knocked, arms crossed, jaw tight, walking up my path as if it belonged to her. She didn't bother with the doorbell. She used her knuckles. 3 quick, impatient taps. I opened the door halfway. Not wide, not welcoming. Martha, she said, stepping forward as if expecting me to move aside. I didn't. Rachel. She hesitated, just a flicker, then forced a tight smile. We need to talk. Her voice was controlled, but I could hear the strain beneath it. The sound of a woman whose comfort had slipped through her fingers faster than she could grasp it. All right, I said. Talk. She walked past me without waiting for permission. I let her. Sometimes silence makes a clearer boundary than a closed door. She stood in the center of my living room, scanning it the way one inspects a hotel room, assessing, silently judging. Then she turned to me. I don't know what Daniel told you, she began, voice pitched too carefully. But things are difficult right now. The mortgage issue, the utilities. This isn't a good time for surprises. I folded my hands in front of me. I didn't create the surprises. I simply stopped covering them. Her mouth tightened. You know how much we rely on you. Yes, I said softly. That's the problem. She took a breath, steadying herself. You're his mother. Helping us is normal. Expected even. Expected by whom? I asked. Rachel blinked, thrown off. By family. Family, I repeated. The same family that didn't want me at their dinner because I might make things uncomfortable? Color rose on her cheeks. Anger or embarrassment, it didn't matter. That was a misunderstanding. No, I said gently. It was perfectly clear. She exhaled sharply and crossed her arms. Martha, you're taking this too personally. I almost smiled. That phrase, the favorite shield of people who don't want to face the truth of their own behavior. What other way is there to take being excluded from my son's home? I asked. Or being told I should live less comfortably because you two wanted more? She looked away for a moment, then back at me. We were stressed. We said things without thinking. No, I said quietly. You said them because you were thinking. You just didn't expect me to hear myself in the truth. Her lips pressed into a line. Fine. Maybe we mishandled things. But closing the credit line? Canceling everything? That's extreme. It's necessary, I replied. For who? She shot back. Because certainly not for us. For me, I said. Silence followed. The heavy kind, the kind that forces truth into the open. Rachel stared at me, her expression shifting from irritation to calculation. She took a step closer. If you're worried about something, she said softly, we can help. We can manage your bills. Keep an eye on things. I let out a slow breath. Rachel, I canceled your access. Not because I'm confused, not because I'm scared. Because I'm done being treated like a bank with a heartbeat. Her eyes hardened. Without your support, we can't maintain the life we built. Then build a different one, I said. She opened her mouth. To protest, to argue, to insist. Then closed it again when she saw that nothing in my face would move. You're making a mistake, she said finally. No, I whispered. I'm correcting one. She stood there for another moment, searching my face for some crack she could pry open. She didn't find one. Without another word, she grabbed her purse and walked out. The door clicked shut behind her, not slammed, but firm, final. I stood in the quiet house, listening to the fading sound of her heels on the path. No shaking hands, no guilt, no second thoughts. Just a quiet, steady truth settling deeper into my bones. They had come expecting to sway me, but I was no longer a woman who could be swayed by guilt or fear. For the first time in decades, the only comfort I worried about losing was my own, and I had already reclaimed it. Emily came by that evening just as the sky dipped into the kind of blue that feels like it's holding its breath. I heard her before I saw her. The gentle knock she's had since childhood. 3 soft taps as if she's asking the house permission to enter. A courtesy no one else in my family ever bothered with. When I opened the door, she stood there with her hair pulled up in a messy bun, her backpack slung over one shoulder, and worry written across her young face. "Grandma," she whispered, "are you okay?" I felt something ease inside me at the sight of her. "Come in, sweetheart." She stepped inside, and the moment the door closed, she turned to face me fully. "Dad and Mom are, well, they're furious and confused and arguing with each other and with everyone else. You'd think the world was ending." "I imagine it feels that way to them," I said, moving to the kitchen to make tea. Emily followed, dropping her backpack by the door. "They keep saying you're being unreasonable, that you're acting out of spite, that someone must have influenced you." I let the kettle fill with water, feeling the weight of her words settle like quiet dust on a shelf. "Is that what you think?" Her answer came without hesitation. "No." I think you finally stood up for yourself, and they don't know what to do with that." I turned to face her. She was watching me intently, her brow drawn, her eyes soft with a kind of loyalty that isn't taught. It's inherited. The kettle clicked on. The low hum filled the silence between us. "Sit," I said, motioning to the table. She slid into the chair, folding her hands, waiting. Always patient with me, always present. I sat across from her. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I said, "Emily, you know more than anyone that I've helped your parents for a long time." She nodded. "My whole life." "And it wasn't wrong to help," I continued. "But somewhere along the way, they stopped seeing it as help. They started seeing it as obligation, entitlement." Emily's throat bobbed as she swallowed. "I know." I poured the hot water over the tea leaves, the steam rising between us like an old memory. "Your father came by yesterday." Her head snapped up. "What did he say?" "That I blindsided him, that I should have warned him, that I was making things unnecessarily difficult." Emily rolled her eyes, something she didn't often do. "He's panicking. They both are. But instead of admitting they depended on you too much, they're acting like you betrayed them." "Yes," I said quietly. "But I didn't betray them. I stopped betraying myself." Something in Emily's face softened, then broke open a little, like hearing a truth she'd been waiting to name. She reached across the table and took my hand, gently, the same way she had days before. "Grandma, I'm proud of you." Her voice wavered on the last word, and I felt something in my chest loosen, a knot I'd carried for too many years without noticing the pain it caused. "Thank you," I whispered. She squeezed my fingers. "I mean it. I've seen how they ask you for things, how they expect you to save them, and you never say anything. You just help, even when it hurts you." "They're my children," I said, not as an excuse, but as a fact. "But you're a person," she replied, her voice fierce and earnest at once. "You deserve boundaries. You deserve respect. And you deserve a life that doesn't drain you dry." Her words settled into me slowly, like warmth spreading into cold hands. We sat there for a long while, drinking tea, letting the quiet work its way around us. Emily told me about her classes, her friends, the book she was reading. She spoke in small, thoughtful bursts, as she always had. And I listened, truly listened, with a heart that felt steadier than it had in years. When she finally stood to leave, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me. Not a hurried embrace, not a distracted one, but a full, grounding hug. The kind you don't forget. "Whatever happens next," she murmured into my shoulder, "you're not alone. I'm here. I'll always be here." I closed my eyes and breathed her in. Peppermint shampoo, library dust, youth, sincerity. When she walked down the path and waved goodbye, something remarkable lingered in the air behind her. Not sorrow, not guilt, not fear. A quiet, unwavering truth. Someone in my family still loved me for who I was, not what I provided. And that alone was enough to keep me steady for what I knew was coming next. They called it a family discussion, as if giving it a name could soften the edges, as if the word family still held the weight it once did. Daniel texted me the night before, a clipped, formal message. "We need to talk. All of us. Tomorrow at 5. Please don't make this harder. Please don't make this harder." As though the difficulty hadn't been theirs to begin with. I didn't agree, but I didn't refuse either. I simply wrote back, "I'll be there." Not because they demanded it, but because I had nothing left to fear from a room full of people who only remembered I existed when something went wrong. I arrived at their house at exactly 5. Not early, not late. The door opened before I touched the bell, as if Daniel had been standing on the other side waiting to intercept me. His face looked older than it had days ago. Stress has a way of adding years quickly to people unaccustomed to carrying their own weight. "Mom," he said, stepping aside. I walked in. The air felt thick, like a pressure front before a storm. Rachel stood near the kitchen island, arms crossed, lips tight. The children were nowhere in sight, tucked away, I assumed, so the adults could perform whatever scene they had prepared. We moved into the living room. They sat on the couch. I sat in the armchair opposite them, the same seat I always took, except now I didn't feel like a guest. I felt like an observer in a play I'd finally stopped acting in. Daniel cleared his throat. "We're worried about you." Of course they were. Not when I was lonely. Not when I was sick. Not when I was grieving. But now, when the credit line had vanished and bills no longer paid themselves, worry bloomed like a weed in their garden. "I appreciate the concern," I said, "but I'm quite well." Rachel leaned forward, voice brittle. "Are you? Because from where we're standing, your decisions seem impulsive." "On the contrary," I replied, "I've never been more deliberate." She made a sound, part disbelief, part annoyance. "You've put us in a very difficult position." I met her gaze calmly. "No, you put yourselves there." I simply stepped back. Daniel rubbed his forehead. "Mom, we're asking for transparency. You should have talked to us before canceling everything. We're a family. We make decisions together." "Is that so?" I asked. "Was I part of the decision to exclude me from your dinner? Or the decision to tell me to live less comfortably? Or the decision to treat my support as entitlement?" Rachel stiffened. Daniel's jaw tightened. "That's not what this is about," he muttered. "It's exactly what this is about," I said. Silence pressed between us, heavy and full of unspoken truths. Daniel finally looked up, eyes tense. "We need your help, Mom." There it was, stripped of excuses, softened phrasing and polite illusions. Not love, not understanding, help. "What kind of help?" I asked gently, though I already knew. "The payments," he said, "at least until things stabilize." "And after that?" He hesitated. "We'll figure it out." Meaning, "We'll take the help as long as you provide it." I folded my hands in my lap. "Daniel, I'm not restoring the arrangement. Not temporarily. Not partially. Not at all." Rachel's breath caught, sharp and indignant. "You're punishing us." "No," I said. "I'm freeing myself." Daniel stared at me, something like disbelief flickering across his face. Disbelief that the version of me they used to command was gone. "Mom," he whispered, "we're drowning." "You're adults," I said softly. "You'll learn to swim." They stared at me then, truly stared, as if seeing me for the first time. Not the soft mother who absorbed every blow. Not the silent helper who filled every gap. But a woman, older, wiser, steadier, who finally understood the difference between love and servitude. When it was clear nothing they said would move me, Rachel stood abruptly, the conversation collapsing like wet paper. "Well," she said, voice tight, "that's that." Daniel didn't stand. He just looked at me with something between defeat and resentment. I rose slowly. "I wish you both well," I said, "but I won't carry your life anymore. No shouting, no tears, no scenes. Just truth, quiet, final, and mine." I left their house the same way I had entered, with my head high, my steps steady, and my heart, perhaps for the first time in years, unburdened. The next morning, I woke before the sun, not from tension this time, but from something gentler, a quiet lightness, the kind that comes when a long-held weight finally learns to let go of your ribs. For the first time in years, I didn't rush out of bed worrying about someone else's overdue bill or emergency text or subtle demand disguised as a quick favor. I sat there on the edge of the mattress, letting my feet find the floor slowly, feeling the warmth of the room settle around me. It was astonishing how empty my mind felt. Empty in the best way, like a cupboard finally cleared of things I never needed. I made breakfast for myself. Nothing extravagant, just toast with butter and a soft-boiled egg. But I ate it without distraction, without checking my phone, without keeping one ear tuned for trouble. The house was quiet, but this time, it wasn't loneliness. It was peace. I puttered through the morning doing small things that had always been pushed aside. Tightening a loose screw on the curtain rod, wiping down the windowsills, pruning the sad little fern by the kitchen sink. Ordinary tasks. But today, they felt like reclaiming pieces of my life, one by one. Around noon, I took my old coat from the closet and walked to the small park 2 blocks down. I hadn't gone in months, not because I was incapable, but because I had been too busy being everyone's emergency exit. The air was cool, the kind of cool that wakes your lungs gently. The path wound between trees that were beginning to shed their yellow leaves, and I walked slowly, my body remembering a rhythm that wasn't rushed. A few children were running near the swings. Their laughter reminded me of the years when Daniel was small, before adulthood hardened him, before expectations twisted into resentment. I felt no bitterness, just a distant ache, like pressing a bruise that had finally begun to heal. I sat on a bench near the pond and watched the ducks glide across the water. One of them dipped its head, tail bobbing clumsily in the air. The sight made me smile, a simple, unexpected smile that didn't hurt on the way out. For the first time in a long while, I asked myself a question I'd avoided for years. What do I enjoy? Not what I tolerate, not what's convenient, not what fits between other people's needs. What do I enjoy? The question felt almost foreign, but the silence inside me, soft, open, told me that I finally had space to answer it. I spent the afternoon the way I used to before life became an endless string of obligations. Reading. I took my old armchair by the window, a blanket over my lap, a book I'd meant to start but never had the room in my mind for. The pages turned slowly. I wasn't rushing anywhere. Even later, when the sky dimmed and the house folded itself into twilight, I didn't feel the old restlessness. No ticking clock, no waiting for a call, no bracing for blame. My phone buzzed only once. A short text from Emily. "Thinking of you. Hope you're resting today." I replied simply, "I am." Truthfully, it felt like the first honest "I am" I'd spoken in years. By evening, I made myself a small dinner and ate it by the window, watching the streetlights flicker on. The world outside kept moving, cars, footsteps, distant voices. But inside my house, everything felt gently paused, restored. I didn't know what Daniel and Rachel were doing. I didn't wonder. I didn't pace or imagine or dread. That entire part of my mind, the part that had once stayed on constant alert, was finally quiet. It surprised me how natural it felt, as if I'd been meant to return to myself all along. Before bed, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror. A woman of 72 looked back at me. Lines, silver hair, a softness around the eyes that age brings, and something else. Dignity. A steadiness I hadn't seen in myself in decades. I touched the edge of the mirror lightly, as though reacquainting myself with an old friend. "I remember you," I murmured. Not the mother who bent until she nearly broke. Not the bank disguised as a woman. Not the shadow at the edge of someone else's comfort. Just me, Martha. A woman who finally chose her own quiet, her own pace, her own life. And as I turned off the light, I felt it clearly. I was not done yet. Not with living, not with choosing, not with being whole again. Daniel came alone this time. I saw his car roll slowly into my driveway just after dusk, the headlights brushing across the front of the house like uncertain hands. He didn't park the way he usually did, crooked and hurried. Tonight, he eased the car into place, careful, almost hesitant, as if the gravel itself might judge him. I was sitting in the living room with a lamp on, the soft yellow glow warming the quiet. When he knocked, one single heavy knock, I closed my book and stood. No rush, no dread, just a calm, steady breath. When I opened the door, Daniel looked smaller, not in size, but in spirit. His shoulders hunched, his eyes tired, his face drawn in a way that no argument could cause. He wasn't angry now. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't demanding. He was unraveling. "Mom," he said, voice low, "can I come in?" I stepped aside. He walked to the middle of the living room, then stopped, as if unsure where to stand. I gestured to the couch. He sat, but his hands twitched, restless, the way they used to when he was a boy who'd done something wrong and wasn't ready to face the consequences. I took my usual place in the armchair. The lamp hummed softly between us. For a long moment, he didn't speak. He just stared at his hands. Then finally, in a voice that sounded scraped raw, he said, "I'm sorry." Not loud, not practiced, not dramatic. Just small. I waited, not out of cruelty, simply because I knew the difference between an apology and an opening line. He inhaled sharply. "I didn't realize how much we depended on you. I didn't realize how unfair it was. I didn't." He swallowed. "I didn't see any of it." "You didn't want to see," I said gently. His eyes flicked up, pained but honest. "Maybe. No, definitely. It was easier to believe you'd always be there." I nodded. "It usually is." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Mom, things are bad. We're behind on everything. The house, the bills. My job is shaky right now. Rachel is furious, and His voice cracked. "I miss you." I didn't flinch, but something in me tightened, a soft ache that didn't ask to be soothed. "I never left," I said. "You pushed me out." His face twisted, shame settling deep into the lines around his eyes. I know, and I'm sorry. Truly." I believed he meant it, in that moment. But sincerity born from crisis is a fragile thing. It fades fast once comfort returns. He scrubbed a hand over his face. "Can we start over? Maybe get the payments reinstated until we're back on our feet? I don't mean forever, just until things stabilize." There it was. The second truth beneath the first. The need beneath the apology. The habit beneath the regret. I let the silence rest between us before I asked, "Do you want me? Or do you want my help?" His breath caught. "I want both," he whispered. I nodded slowly, as if considering it. "And when your life is smooth again?" When the bills are paid? When comfort returns? He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Because we both knew the truth. I stood up, walked to the lamp and adjusted the shade, letting its glow soften. Then I turned back to him. Daniel, I said quietly, I love you. I always will. His eyes filled, not overflowing, but enough for a shine. But I will not finance your life anymore. He looked startled, wounded, maybe even betrayed, though he had no right to feel any of those things. Mom? No, I said softly. Listen. He fell silent. You're capable. You're grown. You have a family of your own, and you will find your footing, but not on my back. He looked down, breathing unevenly. I don't know how to fix all of this. You'll learn, I said. Not because I rescue you, but because you have to. He sat there, absorbing the words like someone tasting something bitter and necessary. After a long moment, he whispered, So that's really it. That's it, I said. Not the end of us, but the end of me being your safety net. He nodded slowly. Then he stood. He looked older than he had when he arrived. Not defeated, but humbled. The way a man looks when life finally expects him to stand on his own legs. At the door, he paused. Mom, he said, voice quiet. Thank you for not yelling. For everything. I touched his arm gently. Go home, Daniel. Take care of your family. Start fresh. He nodded once, then stepped out into the cool night air. I watched him walk to the car, shoulders heavy, steps slow, but moving forward. When I closed the door behind him, I exhaled a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. No gloating, no triumph. Just the steady, grounded truth. I had finally chosen myself, and it felt peaceful. In the days that followed, the house felt different, not quieter. It had always been quiet, but clearer, like someone had wiped a long, fogged window and let the light back in. I moved through my rooms slowly, not from age, but from a new kind of awareness, touching objects I hadn't looked at properly in years. The framed photograph of George in the garden, the chipped teacup Emily made when she was 7, the faded quilt my mother stitched by hand. They all felt like parts of a life I had been too busy, too burdened to inhabit fully. My phone didn't ring as often. When it did, the sound no longer sent a jolt of dread through me. Most calls were simple, administrative follow-ups about the changes I'd made. A few were from Daniel. Short, cautious updates. Not requests. Just updates. He sounded tired, but also different. Like a man beginning to understand what accountability feels like. Rachel didn't call at all. I didn't miss the silence. Emily visited every other day. She brought muffins, school gossip, half-finished poems written in the margins of her notebooks. She curled up on my couch with her legs folded underneath her and let the house fill with the soft hum of her stories. Sometimes she asked how I was feeling. Sometimes we didn't speak at all, just sat together while the light shifted across the floor. She told me once in a quiet moment, "You seem lighter, Grandma." And I realized she was right. For the first time in decades, my life felt shaped by my own hands, not by obligation, not by guilt, not by fear of being needed or rejected. Just mine. On a Thursday afternoon, I walked to the park again. The leaves had turned deeper by then. Amber, burnt orange, the color of endings that make way for beginnings. I sat on the bench near the pond, the same bench where I'd rediscovered myself a week before, and watched the water ripple in slow, thoughtful circles. Across the path, a young woman pushed a stroller while talking on the phone, her voice sharp with exhaustion. A boy tossed crumbs toward the ducks. An older couple walked hand in hand, stopping every few steps to admire some small detail of the world. Life moved, as it always does. I let my breath fall into its own rhythm, steady and full. For so long, I had believed I was losing something if I stopped giving. Love, closeness, purpose. I thought sacrifice was the price women of my age must pay to stay needed. But sitting there beneath the slow falling leaves, I understood something else. I hadn't been losing. I had been disappearing, piece by piece. Payment by payment. Silence by silence. And now, finally, the pieces were coming back. When I returned home, evening light drifted through the living room, soft and honey-colored. I warmed leftovers, poured myself a glass of water, and ate slowly, savoring each bite without the weight of someone else's deadlines pressing into my thoughts. After dinner, I sat in my armchair and looked around the room. The walls, the photos, the quiet little life I'd rebuilt in the span of a few brave days. Not grand, not dramatic, but whole. I thought of Daniel, of his tired eyes, his humbled voice. I hoped he would grow from this, not for my sake, but for his own, and for Emily, who deserved a father who understood what real love meant, not convenience, not dependence, but respect. When the clock chimed 9, I rose, turned off the lamp, and stood for a moment in the dim glow of the hallway. A 72-year-old woman, a widow, a mother, a grandmother, and finally, a person who belonged to herself. I whispered into the quiet house. I did the right thing. Not loudly, not triumphantly, just honestly. Sometimes the quietest choices are the ones that save us. And as I slipped into bed, pulling the quilt up to my chin, I felt a peace settle into me like the closing of a well-loved book, gentle, earned, whole. If anyone had told me, even a month ago, that I would reclaim my life at this age, I might have laughed. But life has a way of surprising even old women like me. We are stronger than people think. Quieter, yes, but not weaker. Never weaker. And if my story means anything at all, let it be this. You are allowed to choose yourself. At 72, at 80, at any age. You are allowed to reclaim what was always yours. Your dignity, your time, your peace. And if you need someone to remind you of that truth now and then, follow along. I have more stories to tell, and you deserve to hear every one of them.